Netflix has a new formula for success. Ryan Murphy True Crime Miniseries. Ryan Murphy now takes on the spooky tale of new homeowners who are greeted to their new digs by a series of increasingly threatening and personal letters signed The Watcher. Based on a true story provides a lot of leeway on what's true and what's not. So let's take a deeper look into the fact versus fiction in The Watcher. I'm Joey C. Let's go! The line made famous by the long-running series Dragnet, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. It's a hallmark of true crime stories. In some cases, like the 2016 Lifetime movie about the same event, also called The Watcher, it's because the film was unable to contact anyone involved in the real event, or the people involved wanted nothing to do with it. For instance, in The Watcher, it's, with the sole exception of the portrayal of certain actual events or persons, the characters and events depicted in this television series are fictional, and any similarities to actual people living or dead is purely a coincidence and unintentional. Unlike the Lifetime movie, the actual family, the Broadduses, did cooperate with the production with the caveat that their name be changed and the family not resemble them. The Broadduses had 3 young children under 10 who were never aware of what was going on, while the Brannocks had 2 teenagers with completely fictional arcs. The first letter in the real story and the series arrived soon after the house was purchased, in a move that would satisfy most ghost story viewers who complain about people staying put when the house makes it clear that they should leave. The Broadduses never actually moved into the home. Initially, it was a matter of renovations, but after the second letter that identified their children by name, including an activity of one of them in an area not visible from the street or many angles, they erred on the side of caution, and when their previous house sold, they moved in with relatives nearby. They put the house back up for sale quickly, but felt obliged to reveal the letters to potential owners who all backed out at that point. Various options were considered, including renting it out to a halfway house organization and splitting the lot into 2 separate lots. In the meantime, they did find a family to rent the house to. They were the ones that passed on the 4th letter. After buying the home in 2014, they finally sold the home in 2019, but for $400,000 less than what they paid for. Part of the drama hinges on the effect the Watcher letters have had on previous owners of the home, and the legacy of weirdness surrounding it. While it made the whole thing creepier and larger in scope, the reality is the previous owners only received 1 single letter when they began the process of selling their home, after having lived there for 23 years. Since that letter was more or less benign like the first letter the Broadduses received, they threw it away without thinking much about it. The current owners have not reported receiving any letters. In the revolving door of suspects and potential plots, the Brannocks of the series run across a former high school teacher who had assigned his kids a project to write a love letter to a house they love. It turns out that the teacher had grown up in the area and had become infatuated with the elaborate houses in the 99th wealthiest community in the United States. While he was not part of the lofty elite, his friends were, and he fell in love with the neighborhood, specifically 657 Boulevard. This reflects actual teacher and author Robert Kaplaw, who sent a series of love letters to a house in Westfield. Just not that house. They were non-threatening, but more importantly, non-anonymous. He openly created a relationship between him and the owners of the home, who even let him house sit on occasion. And I gotta be honest with you, that's a little creepy. It wouldn't happen in my house. One more neighbor eventually reported receiving a single letter in the wake of all the drama, but since the family, on advice of law enforcement, had been keeping the letters under wraps, the neighbors didn't make the connection and threw the letter away, only later coming forward after hearing about the Broadduses' letters. Early frontrunners as the identity of the Watcher is the nosy couple from across the street, although the real-life neighbors weren't as bold as portrayed in the show. The original New Yorker story did include an observation that there were chairs facing the property at 657 Boulevard. One of the painters noted that a man was sitting in those chairs just watching the work being done in the home. While there certainly was someone in lawn chairs observing the property, that's really where that tie to reality ends. In the series, Dean Brannock manages to find a former resident who is also harassed by letters, and then witness something even more disturbing. In the basement, he saw a ritual with red robes and a whole thing where Mitch and Maureen and others participated in a blood sacrifice of a baby, presumably to drink the blood to stay young. Now that sounds like something out of Murphy's American Horror Story, and that's because it more or less is, which is to say that it's a complete creation for the series, and outside the usual background radiation of people assuming that's happening, there was never any accusations of a blood ritual happening in the home, nor did that previous owner, who is later revealed to be an unreliable narrator. He was also created for the show. In true Murphy style, the accusations of being part of a blood cult was just the opening act for the nosy neighbors Mitch and Maureen. Over the course of the series, they appear to be the victims of a suicide pact over Maureen's advancing cancer, and the growing stress of the Watcher, and the tension with the Brannocks, only to discover that the whole thing was a cover-up for their son, and Mitch and Maureen were alive and well. Let's face it, if there was a couple who faked their own death to cover up for their son, the show would have been just about them, because that's bonkers. Naturally, it didn't happen. Another set of neighbors and prime suspects get their inspiration from, but not are completely accurate to what the Broadduses felt was the primary suspect. Mia Farrow and Terry Kinney play Pearl and Jasper Winslow in the series. Pearl is kind of a nightmarish version of what American Gothic might look like in upper-class suburbia, and her brother Jasper is developmentally challenged and fascinated with the house's dumbwaiter, including sneaking in to be discovered by the kids. The real family was the Lanfords, and it included the 90-year-old matriarch Peggy and her 60-year-old children. One of them, Michael, was described as having an Ernest Hemingway beard and was a bit of a Boo Radley for the neighborhood. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he would sometimes exhibit odd or disturbing behavior, like crossing into people's yards or looking into windows of houses being rebuilt. He was investigated a few times as the prime suspect, but was never proven and was generally regarded as being harmless. One of the more compelling potential culprits, and disturbing people in general, was the mysterious John Graff. The steady, if stiff stand-in for Michael Douglas's D. Ferns from Falling Down is discovered to have supposedly murdered his entire family in 1995, and then cut himself out of all the family photos so he could not be found. This was part of the curse of 657 Boulevard. This mirrors the real-life John List of Westfield, New Jersey. In 1971, after struggling with employment and taking money from his mother to cover for it, John List shot his entire family, including his mother, wife, and teenage children. He cut himself out of all the photos and left, leaving behind a 5-page note to his pastor telling him that he had saved his family from the growing evil in this world. The family he later started in Virginia after fleeing were apparently well suited for the coming evil. List was caught in his new life 18 years later when an aged-up image of him was included as part of the series America's Most Wanted. He had been living as Robert Clark, and his neighbor recognized his face from America's Most Wanted and alerted the authorities, who were able to determine his identity. He was given 5 life sentences, with the first one ending when he died in prison at the age of 82 in 2008. He had a long run, but eventually, all the bad guys get caught, baby. While never established as culprits in the Watcher letters, the secretive Westfield Preservation Society certainly managed to establish themselves as villains. They even had wanted murderer John Graff as part of their club. It turns out Graff was evading capture by living in the secret underground tunnels. While there wasn't a shadowy figure plotting against the Broadduses, they did attract the eye of the town, prompting 100 people to show up to their local zoning meeting. The couple had planned on splitting the property into 2 lots to sell it that way, and the residents of Westfield gave a resounding no, not wanting, among other things, front-facing garages. Sounds ridiculous, but that's true. Henry Hunter Hall, whose friends almost certainly called him Triple H at one point or another, portrayed the entrepreneur Dakota who helps install a security system and cameras for the Brannock family. The 19-year-old also becomes the object of affection for the Brannock's 16-year-old daughter. When the dad breaks the two up, they both retaliate in increasingly destructive ways. The daughter accuses the dad of breaking them up because he's against interracial relationships, while Dakota releases footage of a young girl wearing the same nightgown as Gaff's daughter, joining Dean Brannock in bed without his knowledge. None of which happened, of course. There was a neighbor who owned a security company that provided assistance to the family, and cameras were installed. but not by a 19-year-old entrepreneur, but a major security company whose CEO lived in the high-income neighborhood. Police did surveillance on the house and did discover a couple stopping in front of the house in the middle of the night. When questioned, the girlfriend did reveal that her boyfriend had used the moniker The Watcher in video games like Dakota in the series. They asked him to come in for questioning, but after 2 no-shows, they just wrote him off as a suspect, which kind of boggles me, because if you're in trouble for a crime and the police say, hey pal, why don't you just come in for questioning, you can just no-show and no one will ever do anything about it. In the series, the couple confront Karen, their real estate agent, and Nora Brannock's old friend, about not revealing that the previous owners had been harassed by letters, but were told they were not obligated to tell them. This is something that the Broadduses learned when they actually sued the previous owners for not disclosing the letters under the provision that meant that, among other things, if a house was thought to be haunted, that needed to be revealed to potential owners. Essentially saying, as far as the law is concerned, the house is haunted. New Jersey has no such provisions, and the Broadduses lost their case. But if you take away nothing else from this, take away that in some states, houses for legal purposes can be considered haunted. The Brannocks face an uphill battle trying to get anyone to take their problem seriously, and it gets even worse when they falsely accuse the local sheriff of being in on it with realtor Karen, who he starts dating. While the specifics are true, the Broaddus family did have a hard time getting any serious investigation done early on, which caused delays and allowed some key evidence to expire more or less. However, in addition to the private investigator that the Broaddus hired, who disappointingly was not a former jazz singer, the investigation was picked up by various entities, and they even enlisted the help of a linguistic analysis to glean clues from the text. Phrasing and references indicated that it was probably someone older, at least in their 60s. It probably has not escaped your notice that there is a whole thing going on with the cost of housing. That thing being is that it's increasingly expensive and increasing rapidly. Perhaps to reflect that reality, the numbers were upped in this series. The Brannocks talk about having bought the home for $3 million in the show. The Broadduses in real life paid $1.3 million in 2014, but then sold it for $900,000 in 2019. By now, we all know that prosecutors are frustrated by the CSI effect. Procedural police shows have created an unrealistic expectation of scientific evidence that singles out the bad guy, something forensic science not written for a procedural can't provide. However, one piece of forensics was true in the series. The third letter, sent 2.5 years after the first 2, was tested for DNA from the envelope, and it was determined that whoever sent the letters had no Y chromosome. This only proved that the Watcher didn't have a Y chromosome, or that they got someone without a Y chromosome to lick the envelope. One of the twists and turns is the notion that the Brannocks themselves, or at least one of them, was sending the notes to get themselves out of a house they could not afford. This actually pans out when it is revealed that Dean had sent the last letter in order to prompt his wife to sell the house. While Derek Broaddus never sent his own Watcher letters, he did leave anonymous letters in his neighbors' mailboxes that accused the Broadduses of writing their letters. They did sign the letters Friends of the Broadduses, which I guess technically is still true, but regardless, Derek is not proud of the letters. One of the letters indicated that the Broadduses would not be able to hear the children scream all the way down in the basement if they were upstairs, which is super unsettling. It would be even more unsettling to find a secret tunnel into that basement later where a mysterious figure has been living, which is a good thing none of that happened. Well, the part about the kids screaming in the letter, but not the tunnel. Dean is right, however. Upstate New York and New Jersey have had a lot of secret tunnels dating back to not just Prohibition, but also the Underground Railroad. One ranch in upstate New York has opened a craft distillery on a ranch with bootlegger tunnels named after Dutch Schultz, notorious Prohibition gang leader. Desperate to find some sort of relief or feeling of safety, the Broadduses considered some options for safety. They looked into the cost of a trained German Shepherd. He also considered hiring military vets to work out in his backyard as an act of intimidation, which sounds absolutely bonkers, but needless to say, the plan was abandoned, and probably for the best. Each entry in the 7-episode series seemed to follow one elaborate conspiracy after another. That turns out to be a product of how it was made. When production started on the show, Murphy approached it episode by episode. As they worked, they would get tips and theories from locals, followers, as well as Reddit, where curious parties would post their own theories. Murphy would take these theories and go down the rabbit hole, if you will, with them to form the theories that ended up in the series. This one tickles me in places I can't tell you. Since the letters had a literary affection, there was a search for some sort of literary inspiration for this event. That led to a 19th century short Gothic horror by Irish author J. Sheridan Le Fanu about a man driven mad by threatening letters written to him under the pen name The Watcher. The series makes note of the house's view of a nearby lake, but Westfield, New Jersey doesn't have a lake. The filming location in Rye, New York has a lake though. This is the second series this year on Netflix that was inspired by an article in the New Yorker's The Cut. The first was the series Inventing Anna, about a mysterious con woman. Ladies and gentlemen and everybody else in between, I just have one more thing to ask. In the show, they say the address is 657 Boulevard, but what is the name of the street? Is it 657 Boulevard, or is it just Boulevard? Too many questions. Thanks for watching, everybody. We greatly appreciate it. Keep your eye out for the next video. See you later.